Good evening, ladies. It is Madam Reed. Tonight's story begins with a Bluetooth connection. A married woman is driving her husband to the airport when his phone syncs to the car speakers and broadcasts his mistress, who also happens to be her neighbor, her Pilates partner, and the woman she trusted with her house keys, calling her a boring suburban wife. What happens next is not a breakdown. It is a boardroom takeover. Let's get into it. The Range Rover-esque cabin, usually a sanctuary of heated leather and quiet luxury, suddenly transformed into a slaughterhouse. "I'll be right over, baby, just as soon as your boring suburban wife drops you off." The voice echoing through the 14-speaker Meridian surround sound system belonged to Kristen Lawson. My neighbor, my Pilates partner, the woman I had trusted with my house keys and my deepest insecurities. A breathless, sickening giggle filled the car. God, she actually thinks I am her best friend. She's so incredibly clueless. It's almost sad. Then came the unmistakable guttural sound of my husband laughing. My hands remained perfectly steady on the hand-stitched steering wheel. We were cruising at 65 miles per HR on the I-95, heading toward airport. The crisp Connecticut morning sun was pouring through the windshield, illuminating the sudden, horrifying sheen of sweat breaking out on my husband's forehead. Marcus sat in the passenger seat, his custom-tailored Tom Ford suit, suddenly looking like a cheap Halloween costume. He was frantically jabbing at the touchscreen, his manicured fingers trembling so violently he couldn't hit the disconnect button. "Olivia, he choked out, his voice cracking like a terrified teenager's. "That's not. It's an old audio file. A joke. A stupid prank." The Bluetooth finally disconnected, plunging the car into a deafening, heavy silence. The only sound left was the rhythmic thumping of my own heart. It wasn't beating with panic, though. It was beating with a cold, terrifying clarity. For the past 3 years, I had traded my corner office on Wall Street for PTA meetings and organic bake sales, all to create a perfect, stress-free environment for our son. I had dulled my own edges so Marcus could feel like the king of the castle. And in return, he had been treating my life, my trust, and my home as a punchline with the woman who lived 3 doors down. "Olivia, please say something," Marcus pleaded. The arrogance that usually defined his every movement was entirely gone. He reached across the center console, trying to place his hand over mine. I didn't flinch. I simply hit the right turn signal. The rhythmic tick-tick of the blinker sounded like a countdown. I smoothly navigated the heavy SUV across 2 lanes of morning traffic and pulled onto the gravel shoulder of the highway. I shifted the gear into park, the engine purring softly beneath us. I turned my head slowly and looked at the man I had shared a bed with for 10 years. His face was ashen, his eyes darting around wildly, searching for a lifeline. He was waiting for the tears. He was bracing for the hysterical screaming, the slapping, the classic breakdown of a betrayed housewife. He knew how to handle a crying woman. He could manipulate tears, but I didn't give him a single drop. This is the hinge of the entire story. Marcus was braced for hysteria. He had a playbook for tears, deflect, comfort, gaslight, repeat. Olivia recognized that in real time, on a highway at 65 miles per HR, and chose to deny him the only currency he knew how to trade in. She didn't give him a scene. She gave him a gravel shoulder on the I-95 and a view of her taillights. The most disorienting thing you can do to a man expecting a breakdown is hand him a suitcase. "Get out," I said, 2 words. Quiet, perfectly enunciated, and sharp enough to draw blood. Marcus blinked, his mouth dropping open in genuine shock. "What, Liv?" "No, you are not thinking straight. My flight to Cabo boards in 2 hours. I have a massive tech conference. I don't care if you are flying to the moon, Marcus. Get out of my car. You can't do this. His panic was beginning to curdle into defensive anger. We are on the side of the interstate. You are acting crazy. Let's just go home, sit down, and talk about this like rational adults. I reached over and pressed the central unlock button. The heavy clunk of the doors unlatching echoed in the quiet cabin. You have exactly 5 seconds to step out of this vehicle, I said, my voice dropping an octave, radiating the kind of absolute authority I used to reserve for destroying rival hedge fund managers. If you don't, I will call 911, tell them you are becoming violently erratic, and let the state troopers escort you to your flight, your choice. He stared at me, searching my eyes for any trace of a bluff. He found none. The woman looking back at him wasn't the gentle mother who packed his lunches. It was the apex predator he had foolishly forgotten he married, swallowing hard, his Adam's apple bobbing in his throat. Marcus pushed the heavy door open. The roar of passing semi-trucks flooded the car. He scrambled to pull his expensive Toomey carry-on from the back seat, his expensive Italian leather shoes crunching awkwardly on the dirty gravel. "Olivia, please," he shouted over the noise of the traffic, clinging to the open door. "It meant nothing. She means nothing." I looked him dead in the eye. "Close the door, Marcus. You are letting the cold in." Before he could utter another pathetic excuse, I hit the gas. The door slammed shut from the momentum as the Range Rover tore back onto the highway. In the rearview mirror, I watched the vice president of a multi-million-dollar tech company standing in the dirt on the side of the I-95, clutching his suitcase while 18-wheelers blew exhaust in his face. He looked incredibly small. I didn't cry, I didn't scream. Instead, a strange, intoxicating warmth began to spread through my chest. For years, I had felt a vague, suffocating fog in my marriage. Now, the fog was gone. The board was set. My navigation system chimed, ready to guide me back to our sprawling estate in Connecticut. But I wasn't going home. Not yet. E tapped the screen, canceling the route. I typed in a new destination. It was only a 5-minute drive from my own driveway. A beautiful, pristine colonial mansion with perfectly manicured hydrangeas and a custom wrought iron gate, Kristen's house. She had called me a clueless, boring suburban wife. She thought I was the joke. She thought she had won a prize. I pressed my foot down on the accelerator, the engine roaring as I took the next exit. If Kristen wanted to play games with my life, it was only polite that I show up to her doorstep and show her exactly how a Wall Street shark plays to win. The wrought iron gates of Kristen Lawson's estate were already open, a welcoming gesture that felt entirely too ironic given what I was about to do. I parked my Range Rover right in the center of her circular driveway, the tires crunching loudly over the pristine white gravel. I walked up the bluestone steps to her mahogany front door. There was a custom-made doormat that read "Good vibes only." I almost laughed. I pressed the brass doorbell. It chimed a soft, pretentious melody. I stood perfectly still, smoothing the lapels of my cashmere coat. I didn't have to wait long. The door swung open, and there she was. Kristen, my so-called best friend. She was wearing a blush pink La Perla silk robe, the exact one she had dragged me to Bergdorf Goodman to help her pick out last month. I need something to make me feel alive again. She had complained over mimosas. Now I knew exactly who she was planning to feel alive with. When her eyes landed on me, the color drained from her perfectly contoured face so fast it was almost comical. Her hand instinctively flew to the collar of her robe, pulling it tight across her chest, but not before I caught a glimpse of a fresh, purplish red mark blooming on the side of her neck. Olivia. Her voice jumped a full octave, tight and breathless. What are you doing here? Shouldn't you be on your way to JFK with Marcus? Change of plans, I said smoothly, stepping forward. I didn't ask for permission to enter. I simply walked past her, forcing her to step back into the grand foyer. Oh, well, I wasn't expecting company, she stammered, her bare feet padding frantically against the Italian marble floors as she scrambled to keep up with me. I just woke up. I look like a total disaster. You look exactly like what you are, Kristen, I replied without looking back. I strolled into her massive, sunken living room. The evidence of a rushed morning was scattered everywhere. A cashmere throw blanket was pooled haphazardly on the floor. On the Restoration Hardware coffee table sat 2 crystal glasses, one still holding a splash of amber liquid, the rim smudged with a faint trace of Marcus's favorite chapstick. But the most damning evidence wasn't visual, it was the smell. The air in the room was thick with it, the heavy, unmistakable scent of Tom Ford oud wood. Marcus's signature cologne. He bathed in the stuff. I walked over to the plush velvet sofa, the exact spot where they had undoubtedly been rolling around while I was at home packing his travel toiletries, and gracefully sat down. I crossed my legs, resting my hands in my lap. Wow, your house smells familiar, I noted, my tone light, conversational. Kristen swallowed hard. I watched a bead of sweat form at her temple. She began frantically fluffing the throw pillows, desperate to have something to do with her trembling hands. It is a new diffuser, sandalwood and cedar. Anyway, what is going on, Liv? Did Marcus miss his flight? Number, he is on his way, though I imagine he'll have to hail a cab from the side of the interstate. Kristen froze, a pillow clutched to her chest. What do you mean? I didn't answer right away. I let the silence stretch, letting it wrap around her throat like a snare. I reached into my designer handbag and pulled out my iPhone. I tapped the screen, unlocking it, and navigated to the voice memos. You know, Kristen, the Bluetooth technology in the new Range Rovers is incredibly sensitive, I said, my voice dropping to a conversational purr. It connects automatically, even when the car is miles away from the phone. Her eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated terror, she knew. In that split second, she knew exactly what I was about to do. Liv, wait, I pressed play. The audio filled the luxurious living room, crisp and undeniable. I'll be right over, baby, just as soon as your boring suburban wife drops you off. Then came her sickening giggle god. She actually thinks I am her best friend. She's so incredibly clueless. It's almost sad. I watched her face as her own voice condemned her. The panic morphed into a deep, ugly shame. She dropped the pillow. Her hands were shaking so violently, she had to grip the edge of the coffee table to keep her balance. I hit pause. The silence rushed back in, heavier than before. Clueless, I repeated the word, tasting it. That is an interesting choice of adjective from a woman who leaves her lover's cologne lingering in her living room while his wife is standing right in front of her. Olivia, please, Kristen whispered, hot tears finally spilling over her mascara. It is not what it sounds like. It was a mistake. I was lonely, and Marcus. He just initiated it. He said he was miserable. Save the amateur dramatics, Kristen. I am not the country club ethics committee, and I certainly don't care about your loneliness. Seeing that her tears were having absolutely zero effect on me, a sudden, ugly shift occurred in her demeanor. The weeping victim vanished, replaced by the bitter, entitled narcissist I had always suspected lived beneath the surface. She stood up straighter, wiping her eyes, her lips twisting into a vicious sneer. You know what? Fine, she snapped, her voice turning shrill. You want the truth. We've been sleeping together for a year, and you want to know why, Because you are a cold, unfeeling ice queen. You walk around in your perfect little sweaters, obsessed with your kid, acting like you are better than everyone else. Marcus needed passion. He needed a real woman. He loves me, Olivia. He told me he is going to leave you. She stood there, chest heaving, waiting for me to shatter. She wanted me to scream. She wanted a catfight to validate her twisted victory. Instead, I let out a soft, genuine laugh. It echoed in the high-ceilinged room. "Leave me," I smiled, looking at her as if she were a particularly slow child. "Kristen, darling, you really are a special kind of stupid, aren't you?" Her sneer faltered. "What is that supposed to mean?" I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees, my eyes locking onto hers with lethal precision. If Marcus was going to leave me for a woman who offers passion, do you honestly think he'd choose a 39-year-old Pilates instructor whose greatest achievement is marrying a man who pays for her Botox? Kristen gasped, taking a step back as if I had physically struck her. "You think you are the prize," I whispered, my voice dripping with venomous pity. "Tell me, Kristen, do you know Mia? Mia?" Kristen repeated, the name stumbling clumsily off her tongue. The vicious, triumphant sneer that had just been on her face melted into profound confusion. "Who the hell is Mia?" I didn't answer immediately. I simply picked up my phone from the coffee table, swiped left on the screen, and turned it to face her. "This is Mia," I said, my voice as smooth as glass. Kristen leaned in, her eyes narrowing as they focused on the high-resolution image. It was a candid shot I had paid a very discreet, very expensive private investigator to take 3 weeks ago outside Le Bernardin in Manhattan. In the photograph, Marcus was helping a woman into the back of a black sleek town car. The woman was breathtaking. She had the kind of effortless, taut youth that no amount of expensive fillers or chemical peels could ever replicate. She was wearing a tailored Tom Ford dress that hugged every curve, and she was looking up at Marcus with a gaze of pure, unfiltered adoration. Marcus, in turn, had his hand resting possessively on the small of her back, a besotted, idiotic grin plastered across his face. I watched Kristen's eyes dart across the screen, taking in the woman's glossy hair, the flawless jawline, and the unmistakable, glittering Cartier love bracelet circling her slender wrist. "Mia Kensington," I provided helpfully, acting like a museum curator explaining a particularly interesting exhibit. 26 years old, Columbia Business School graduate. She's the new director of acquisitions at Marcus' firm. And, as of 6 months ago, his absolute favorite obsession. "No," Kristen breathed, taking another step back. The color was entirely gone from her face now. She looked physically ill. "No, this is a lie. This is Photoshop. You are just trying to mess with my head." "Oh, Kristen, don't flatter yourself," I sighed, withdrawing the phone and dropping it back into my bag. "I wouldn't waste Photoshop on you. I am simply showing you the reality of your situation." "He loves me," she shrieked, the sound tearing through the quiet elegance of her living room. Her hands flew to her hair, gripping the blonde strands in desperation. "He said he was going to leave you for me. He said what you needed to hear so you'd open your legs on a Tuesday afternoon while your husband was at the golf course," I countered, my tone completely conversational, which only seemed to make her more hysterical. "Let us be brutally honest here. You are geographically convenient. You are free. You are a bored suburban housewife who worships him because you have nothing better to do. You are the appetizer, Kristen. Mia is the main course." Kristen thought she was the leading lady. Olivia walked into her living room and demoted her to a supporting role in under 10 minutes. She didn't come to fight over Marcus. She came to show Kristen that Marcus wasn't even a prize worth fighting for. The photo of Mia wasn't a weapon against Kristen. It was a mirror. And Kristen did not enjoy the reflection. "Shut up! He buys you what? A few dinners at the country club, a silk robe?" I let my eyes drag up and down her trembling frame, making sure she felt the absolute weight of my disdain. "He bought Mia a $20,000 bracelet. He took her to Aspen for team building in February. You are nothing but a mirror he uses to look at his own reflection when he is too lazy to drive into the city." Something inside Kristen snapped. The humiliation was too much, too absolute. With a guttural scream of pure rage, she lunged at me. She raised her hand, aiming her perfectly manicured nails right for my face. She expected me to cower. She expected the soft, yielding suburban mother. She forgot that before I was a mother, I was a Wall Street shark who thrived on anticipating other people's desperate moves. Without even rising from the sofa, my left hand shot out. I caught her wrist mid-air, my grip tightening like a steel vise. Her momentum jerked her forward, and she let out a sharp gasp of pain as my nails dug into her skin. "We do Pilates 5 days a week, Kristen," I whispered, holding her frozen, her face mere inches from mine. I could smell the stale wine on her breath. "You should know by now that my core is much stronger than yours." I shoved her arm back with a sharp, calculated thrust. Kristen stumbled backward, her bare feet slipping on the marble floor. She crashed into the edge of the Restoration Hardware coffee table and collapsed onto the rug, a pathetic, sobbing heap of silk and shattered ego. I stood up, slowly smoothing out the invisible wrinkles in my coat. I looked down at her, feeling absolutely nothing. No pity, no anger, just the cold, clinical satisfaction of a surgical strike. "I am going to leave now," I announced, picking up my handbag. "I have a very busy day ahead of me." I walked toward the grand foyer, my heels clicking rhythmically against the stone. Just as my hand touched the brass doorknob, I paused and looked back over my shoulder. Kristen was still on the floor, weeping into her hands, her perfect life in ruins. "Oh, I almost forgot," I called out lightly. "Marcus Tech Conference this week. It was canceled a month ago. He's currently on a flight to Cabo San Lucas. Mia is meeting him there. They have the presidential suite at the Waldorf Astoria. Enjoy the rest of your morning, neighbor." I didn't wait to hear her scream. I opened the door and stepped out into the crisp, bright Connecticut air. The sun felt spectacular on my face. I walked down the driveway, got into my Range Rover, and locked the doors. The silence in the cabin was no longer suffocating. It was empowering. The fog had completely lifted. I didn't start the engine right away. Instead, I pulled out my phone and scrolled through my contacts, past the PTA moms and the pediatricians, all the way down to a number I hadn't dialed in 3 years. Richard Sterling, CEO of Sterling Hayes Investment Bank. My former boss. I pressed the green call button and put the phone to my ear. It rang twice. "Olivia?" a deep, gravelly voice answered, genuinely shocked. "Well, I'll be damned. To what do I owe the pleasure?" I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. My eyes were clear, sharp, and hungry. "Hello, Richard," I said, a slow, predatory smile spreading across my lips. "I want my job back." "You want your job back?" Richard's voice crackled through the phone, thick with a mixture of disbelief and immediate intrigue. "Olivia, you walked away from a senior VP position 3 years ago to bake organic muffins. You told me you were done with the blood sport." "I was," I replied, my eyes fixed on the pristine steering wheel. "But I've recently discovered a renewed appetite for carnage. I assume my old corner office is still empty." A low, rumbling chuckle vibrated through the speaker. Richard knew me better than anyone. He had mentored me, shaped me, and watched me ruthlessly dismantle rival firms. He didn't ask about Marcus. He didn't ask about my son. He only asked the one question that mattered on Wall Street. How hungry are you? Starving, I said flatly. Good, be in my office tomorrow at 8 a.m. We'll discuss terms, and Olivia. He paused, the amusement fading into a sharp, businesslike tone. Bring your teeth. I never lost them, Richard. I hung up the phone and finally started the engine. For the first time in years, I wasn't driving toward a grocery store or a soccer practice. I was driving toward a war. The rest of the day was a masterclass in compartmentalization. I picked my son up from school, helped him with his science project, and made his favorite mac and cheese for dinner, acting exactly like the devoted mother When he asked where Daddy was, I smiled warmly and said, Daddy had to go on a very important trip, sweetie. He is working hard. It wasn't a lie. Marcus was working hard, just not on his career. By 10 p.m., my son was fast asleep, his breathing even and peaceful. The massive 6-bedroom house was entirely silent, save for the low hum of the central heating. I poured myself a single glass of Pinot Noir, walked into Marcus' mahogany paneled home office, and locked the door behind me. Marcus was a creature of habit and hubris. He believed himself to be a master of deception, but he was fundamentally lazy. He thought the heavy steel wall safe, hidden behind a framed map of historic Connecticut, was impenetrable. He thought I was too oblivious to ever question it. He also thought his password was clever. I pushed the heavy frame aside, exposing the keypad. I didn't even hesitate. I punched in the numbers 091412, the 14th of September 2012. Our wedding anniversary. The lock clicked with a satisfying thunk, and the heavy steel door swung open. Idiot, I whispered into the quiet room. I took a sip of wine, set the glass on his desk, and began pulling out the contents. I didn't rush. I operated with the cold, methodical precision of an auditor. First came the credit card statements, not the joint accounts I managed, but a separate, high-yield American Express Platinum card. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning the charges. $4,000 at a high-end lingerie boutique in Soho, $12,000 for a weekend at a boutique hotel in St. Bart's, $800 at a florist near Columbia University. Then came the real estate documents. My breath hitched slightly as I unfolded a heavy, notarized deed. It was for a luxury condo in Tribeca, purchased 6 months ago. The primary resident listed was Mia Kensington. Marcus had bought his mistress a $2 million apartment, while simultaneously complaining to me that we needed to tighten our belts regarding our son's private school tuition. I didn't cry. The anger I felt wasn't hot or chaotic. It was freezing cold and perfectly focused. Every document I pulled from that safe was another nail in his coffin. I took out my phone and began photographing everything. Every page, every signature, every damning piece of evidence. I uploaded them immediately to a secure, encrypted cloud server. I reached into the very back of the safe, my fingers brushing against a thick manila envelope tucked beneath a velvet box holding his spare Rolex. I pulled it out and opened the clasp. Inside was a stack of legal documents bearing the logo of a prominent offshore banking firm in the Cayman Islands. I sat down in his leather desk chair, spreading the papers out under the warm glow of the desk lamp. As I read through the complex financial jargon, my blood turned to ice. Marcus wasn't just having an affair. He was planning an exit strategy. Over the past 18 months, he had been systematically siphoning money from our joint investment accounts, funneling it through a shell company, and depositing it into an offshore trust. The total amount was staggering. Nearly $3 million of our marital assets, quietly erased from the books. He was starving me out. He was preparing to file for divorce and leave me with a fraction of what we owned, while he lived a life of luxury with his 26-year-old prize. I sat there in the silence, the sheer audacity of his betrayal washing over me. He had underestimated me to a fatal degree. He thought because I had traded my suits for yoga pants, my brain had stopped working. Suddenly, my phone vibrated on the desk, shattering the quiet. It was a text message from the private investigator, target acquired. Live feed established. I tapped the notification. A secure video link opened on my screen. The feed was grainy at first, but it quickly focused. It was a high-angle shot of a stunning, infinity-edge swimming pool overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The Waldorf Astoria in Cabo San Lucas. There, waiting in the crystal-clear water, was my husband. He was holding a margarita, laughing loudly, his arm wrapped tightly around the waist of Mia Kensington, who was wearing a bikini that barely qualified as clothing. I watched them kiss. I watched him pull her close, whispering something in her ear that made her throw her head back and laugh. He looked so incredibly happy. He looked like a man who believed he had won the game. I took a slow, deep breath, picked up my wine glass, and took a sip. "Enjoy your vacation, Marcus," I whispered to the screen, a chilling smile touching my lips. "Because it is the last one you'll ever take." The Sterling Hayes building in Midtown Manhattan was exactly as I remembered it. A soaring monolith of glass and steel that hummed with the electric energy of high-stakes capitalism. It smelled of expensive coffee, adrenaline, and ambition. I walked onto the trading floor at exactly 7:55 a.m. I was wearing a charcoal gray Armani suit that fit like armor, my hair pulled back into a severe, sleek chignon as I strode toward Richard S. Corner office. The familiar cacophony of ringing phones and shouted orders momentarily dipped. Heads turned, whispers rippled through the aisles. The ghost of Wall Street past had returned. Richard was waiting for me, leaning against his mahogany desk, a cup of black coffee in hand. He looked me up and down, a slow grin spreading across his face. "You look dangerous, Olivia," he noted, setting his coffee down. "I am," I replied, taking the seat opposite him. "I need a favor, Richard. A big one, off the books, and entirely deniable." His grin widened. "I am listening." I slid a sleek silver flash drive across the desk. "This contains the routing numbers and account details for an offshore shell company registered in the Cayman Islands. It's currently holding $3 million of my marital assets. My husband is attempting to hide it before he files for divorce." Richard picked up the drive, turning it over in his hand, thought, "And what do you want me to do with it?" "I want it frozen. I want every single transaction flagged, tangled in compliance red tape, and locked down so tight he couldn't extract a dime if his life depended on it. I don't want the money moved, I just want it completely inaccessible." Richard raised an eyebrow. "That requires a very specific set of skills, Olivia. And it dances right on the edge of legality." "I know," I said, leaning forward, my gaze unwavering. "That's why I came to you. You have the contacts, and in return I will personally handle the hostile takeover of the Vanguard group you've been struggling with for the past 6 months. I'll gut them and hand you the pieces on a silver platter." Richard stared at me for a long moment, the silence thick with unspoken calculation. He was weighing the risk against the reward. He knew my track record. He knew I didn't make promises I couldn't keep. Slowly, he slipped the flash drive into his suit pocket. "Consider it done. By noon today, that account will be a black hole." "Thank you," I said, standing up. "Olivia," he called out as I reached the door. "What happens when he realizes the money is gone?" I looked back over my shoulder, a cold smile playing on my lips. "He panics. And when men like Marcus panic, they make mistakes." I spent the rest of the morning settling into my new office, the familiar thrill of the kill washing over me as I dove into the Vanguard files. It was effortless. The strategic ruthlessness that had lain dormant for years roared back to life. At 1 p.m., I took a break and pulled out my personal phone. It was time to tighten the noose. I called my private banker at Chase. "Hi, Sarah, it is Olivia Thorne. I need you to execute a few immediate transfers." "Of course, Mrs. Thorne. How can I help?" "I want all funds from our joint checking and savings accounts transferred into a new single-name account under my sole control. Leave exactly $100 in the joint." "All of it?" Sarah sounded slightly hesitant. "That is a significant amount, Mrs. Thorne." "Yes, Sarah, all of it. And I need you to cancel the Platinum American Express card ending in 4,289 immediately." "The card ending in 4,289. Understood. I'll process that right away." "Thank you." I hung up the phone and leaned back in my ergonomic chair, staring out at the Manhattan skyline. The trap was set. Now all I had to do was wait for the rat to take the cheese. The wait wasn't long. At 3:45 p.m., my phone buzzed on the desk. It was Marcus. I let it ring 3 times before answering, my voice a picture of calm suburban domesticity. "Hi, honey. How is the conference?" "Liv," his voice was tight, high-pitched, and laced with barely suppressed hysteria. "Liv, what the hell is going on with the accounts?" "The accounts," I echoed, feigning mild confusion. "I don't know what you mean. Is something wrong?" "My card was declined," he practically shouted into the phone. "I just tried to pay for dinner, and the Amex was declined. And when I checked the banking app, the joint account is empty. There is $100 in it, Olivia. $100. "Oh, sweetheart, calm down," I soothed, my voice dripping with false concern. "I transferred the money to a new, high-yield savings account this morning. The interest rates were much better, I meant to tell you." "A new account," he choked out. "Why would you do that without telling me? Transfer it back right now." I am standing in the middle of a restaurant looking like an idiot. "I can't, Marcus," I sighed heavily. "It takes 3 business days for the funds to clear. You know how these banks are, but don't worry. Just use your corporate card for the conference expenses." There was a long, agonizing silence on the other end of the line. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head. He couldn't use his corporate card for a romantic dinner with his mistress in Cabo. It would trigger an immediate audit at his firm. "Liv," he said, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "I need cash now. I have a client dinner, a very important client dinner. I can't use the corporate card for this specific venue." "Oh no," I gasped softly. "That is terrible." "Well, what about your emergency fund?" "My what?" "You know," I said, my voice dropping to a low, knowing purr. "The offshore account in the Cayman Islands, the one you've been funneling $3 million into for the past 18 months. Why don't you just use that?" He called her in a panic because his credit card was declined at dinner. She responded by reciting his offshore routing numbers like a bedtime story. The silence that followed, that was the sound of a man realizing his wife had been 10 steps ahead of him since Tuesday. He thought he married a housewife. He forgot he married an auditor. The silence that followed was absolute. It was profound. It was the sound of a man realizing he was standing on a trapdoor and the lever had just been pulled. "Olivia," he whispered, his voice trembling so badly it sounded like he was vibrating. How? How do you know about that?" "I know everything, Marcus," I said, the suburban mother facade completely gone, replaced by the icy razor-sharp edge of the Wall Street shark. "I know about the Tribeca condo. I know about the $20,000 bracelet. And I know you are currently standing in Cabo San Lucas with a 26-year-old child." "Listen to me," he started, the panic finally breaking through. "Listen, we can fix this, I can explain. You have no money, Marcus, I interrupted, my voice devoid of any emotion. Your joint accounts are empty, your credit cards are canceled, and your little Cayman Islands nest egg has been permanently frozen by a very aggressive compliance audit. Frozen, he screamed, the sound echoing through the phone. You can't do that. I already did, I replied calmly. Enjoy the rest of your vacation. Oh, and Marcus, you might want to ask Mia if she can cover the hotel bill. The Waldorf Astoria is quite expensive. I hung up the phone, blocked his number, and turned back to my computer screen. The Vanguard takeover wasn't going to execute itself. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in controlled demolition. While Marcus was trapped in Mexico, desperately trying to untangle a financial web that I had permanently severed, I was busy dismantling the rest of his life. I didn't hire just any divorce attorney. I hired Eleanor Vance. Eleanor was a legend in Connecticut, a woman who wore Chanel suits like armor and possessed the empathy of a great white shark. She didn't negotiate, she dictated terms. When I laid the evidence on her polished mahogany desk, the photos of Mia, the Tribeca deed, the Cayman Islands routing numbers, Eleanor had smiled a slow, terrifying smile. Oh, Olivia, she had purred, adjusting her reading glasses. This isn't a divorce, this is an execution. By Friday afternoon, the paperwork was filed. I had secured an emergency ex parte order, granting me exclusive use of the marital home, temporary sole custody of our son, and a freezing injunction on all remaining domestic assets. Marcus was officially a ghost in his own life. I was sitting in my corner office at Sterling Hayes, reviewing the final draft of the Vanguard acquisition, when my assistant buzzed in. Olivia, there is a Marcus Thorne here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, and he looks quite agitated. Security is holding him in the lobby. I leaned back in my chair, a slow smile touching my lips. Send him up, but have 2 guards escort him. I don't want any messes on the carpet. 5 minutes later, the double doors to my office burst open. Marcus stumbled in, flanked by 2 burly security guards. He looked like a man who had survived a shipwreck. The bespoke Tom Ford suit he had worn on Tuesday was rumpled and stained. He hadn't shaved, and dark, bruised circles hung heavy under his bloodshot eyes. The arrogant, untouchable tech executive was gone. In his place was a desperate, cornered animal. Olivia, he gasped, lunging toward my desk before the guards firmly restrained him by the arms. You have to stop this. You've ruined me. My cards are dead. My accounts are frozen. I had to beg a junior associate to buy me a coach ticket home. I didn't flinch. I slowly closed the Vanguard file and folded my hands neatly on the desk. Hello, Marcus. How was Cabo? Are you insane? He yelled, struggling against the guard's grip. I went to the house. The locks are changed. There is a restraining order taped to the front door. I can't even get my clothes. You won't be needing them, I said calmly. Your new wardrobe should be waiting for you at the Tribeca condo, assuming Mia hasn't changed those locks too. At the mention of her name, Marcus's face crumpled. The fight seemed to drain out of him all at once. He sagged against the guards, his voice dropping to a pathetic, ragged whisper. She left, Liv. When the hotel tried to run my card for the incidentals and it declined, when I told her the Cayman money was locked up, she packed her bags and took a flight back to New York. She won't answer my calls. I felt a brief, almost clinical flash of amusement. Well, what did you expect, Marcus? You bought her loyalty with Cartier and offshore accounts. When the money vanished, so did the illusion. I was stupid, he sobbed. Actual tears finally spilling down his cheeks. The tears he had expected from me on the side of the interstate were now flowing freely from his own eyes. I was so stupid, I lost my mind. It was a midlife crisis, Liv. It meant nothing. I love you. I love our son. Please, just unfreeze the accounts. Let me come home. We can go to counseling. We can fix this. He looked at me with wide, pleading eyes, waiting for the familiar softness he had exploited for 10 years. He was waiting for the suburban mother who always smoothed over his rough edges, who always made things right. I stood up slowly, walked around the massive desk, and stopped just out of his reach. I looked down at him, feeling absolutely nothing but a cold, hard clarity. "There is nothing to fix, Marcus," I said, my voice quiet but echoing with finality. "You didn't make a mistake. You made a series of calculated choices. You chose to betray me. You chose to steal from our son's future to fund your pathetic fantasy. And you chose to do it while treating me like an idiot. Liv, please." "I am not your safety net," I interrupted, my tone slicing through his pleas like a scalpel. "I am the woman who built you. I am the woman who managed your life so you could play at being a titan of industry. And now, I am the woman who is taking it all back." I turned to the security guards. "Escort Mr. Thorne out of the building. If he returns, call the police." "No, Olivia, wait. You can't do this. I have nothing," he screamed as the guards began, dragging him backward toward the door. "I have nothing. You have exactly what you deserve," I replied, turning my back on him. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows, looking out over the sprawling, chaotic beauty of Manhattan. I heard the doors slam shut, cutting off his desperate cries. The silence that followed was exquisite. My phone buzzed on the desk. It was a text from Eleanor Vance. "The judge just signed the final orders. The house, the primary custody, and the remaining assets are yours. He gets the debt on the Tribeca condo. Checkmate," I smiled. A genuine, radiant smile. I picked up my phone and typed a quick reply. "Thank you, Eleanor. Send him the bill." I slipped the phone into my pocket, adjusted the cuffs of my Armani suit, and walked back to my desk. I opened the Vanguard file, picked up my pen, and got back to work. The fog was gone, the board was cleared, and the Queen was finally back in play. Let's talk about the fog. Olivia uses that word twice. She describes the last 3 years of her marriage as a vague, suffocating fog. And then, after the Bluetooth detonated in her car, she says, "The fog was gone." I want to sit with that for a moment, because I think a lot of women know that fog. It is the feeling that something is wrong, but nothing is provably broken. The late nights that have a reasonable explanation. The new passcode on the phone that you don't question, because questioning it would make you paranoid. The slow, invisible withdrawal of warmth that you attribute to stress or work, or the natural settling of a long marriage, because the alternative is too terrifying to name. Olivia lived in that fog for 3 years. She left Wall Street. She traded a corner office for PTA meetings and organic bake sales. She deliberately softened herself so Marcus could feel like the king of his castle. And what did Marcus do with that sacrifice? He used the free time she created for him to build a second life with her neighbor and a third life with a 26-year-old at his firm 3 Women. Let that settle. Kristen, the neighbor. Mia, the protege, Faye, and Olivia, the wife who was funding all of it. Marcus wasn't having an affair. He was running a franchise, now. Kristen. I want to address Kristen, because she is a very specific type of character in these stories. She called Olivia clueless. She called herself the real woman. She delivered a full monologue about how Marcus needed passion, while standing in a robe that Olivia helped her pick out, in a living room that smelled like Olivia's husband's cologne. The confidence was breathtaking. The delusion was clinical. And then Olivia showed her the photo of Mia, and the entire performance collapsed, because Kristen wasn't special. She was convenient. She was 3 doors down and terminally bored. Marcus didn't choose her because she was irresistible. He chose her because she was there. And the moment she realized that she too had been played, that she was the appetizer to someone else's main course, the vengeful seductress crumbled into a woman sobbing on her own marble floor. That is not poetic justice. That is just geometry. Everyone in Marcus's orbit was a concentric ring of deception, and nobody was at the center except his own ego. Now Marcus's defense. Let's examine it. When he was finally cornered, stripped of his money, his house, and his mistresses, what did he say? It was a midlife crisis. It meant nothing. Ladies, when a man tells you his affair meant nothing, he is not minimizing the affair. He is minimizing you. He is saying, I risked everything you built together, and the thing I risked it for wasn't even important. Your marriage, your trust, your years of sacrifice, all of it was worth less to him than something he himself describes as. That is not an apology. That is a confession of indifference dressed in remorse. And the offshore accounts, $3 million funneled to the Cayman Islands, while he told Olivia they needed to tighten their belts on their son's school tuition. He was planning to leave her broke, not just betrayed, financially gutted. He wasn't just unfaithful. He was embezzling from his own family to fund an exit strategy that included a Tribeca condo for his 26-year-old replacement. He thought Olivia had gone soft. He thought 3 years of bake sales and yoga pants had erased the Wall Street shark. He forgot that predators don't lose their instincts in captivity. They just wait. And when the Bluetooth connected, the cage opened. The phone call to Richard Sterling was not a woman asking for help. It was a woman announcing her return. Bring your teeth, Richard said. I never lost them, she replied. That exchange tells you everything. The competence was never gone. It was just sleeping. And Marcus was foolish enough to be the alarm clock. So here is my question for tonight. Have you ever dulled yourself down for someone, made yourself smaller, quieter, softer, only to realize they mistook your generosity for weakness? And when did the fog finally lift? Tell me in the comments. I have a feeling this one is going to start some conversations. Stay sharp, ladies. Madam, read out.